Test.
Hello? Oh, God. Loud enough. What happened to her? I thought she was going to come in here. Hello, Janice. We'll start. By rights, I should probably have attempted to continue some of the efforts that Brian and Mark have brought to you, but I thought I'd just mess it up, and it's a little beyond my pay grade, so I won't do that. But I'm going to delve into something this morning that I told myself if I ever get old enough and I actually understand the scriptures, a little bit, I'll actually read the book of Revelations. But I'm going to talk about that this morning because some of the things that we talked about yesterday at the campground kind of led me to some more thinking about the book of Revelations, and particularly chapters 2 and 3, where John is instructed to write letters to the 7 churches in Ephesus. We all know where the 7 churches were, right? Yeah, right. That's one of the things we need to probably, wherever Mark went, we probably need, and I think I saw TV when it passed, but we probably need some ability to be able to have stuff in here because I was looking at 8:35 when I should be getting in the car this morning. I thought, maybe I should go look and find a map of, Turkey and at that time, but I didn't have enough time. So all these 7 churches are located in what is now southwestern Turkey. At one time in history, all of them were prominent cities. At the time John wrote, some had fallen, sort of like Sardis wasn't much. A couple of the other ones had fallen into not disrepair, but just because of the nature of the economy at that time and the trade routes and things, and the fact that the Roman government gave importance to certain cities and not to others. Some of them were kind of wayside places. The major one was Ephesus. That was on the coast. That was at the end of a number of highways that ran from the interior of what the Romans called Asia, the province of Asia. We think of Asia as a long ways away to the is it west or east? I guess it'd be the east. It's kind of the west from us. But the Romans termed it as Asia, which was that pretty much, it was most of what would be Turkey now, right? I think. And then what was the upper part along the Black Sea called? That was something else. Anyway, but for our purposes, we're in southwestern Turkey today. And if I have not been there, I'm interested in, I would, love to see these places, but I was listening to somebody who was giving a sermon a little bit about this and talking about, and this would be 25 years ago when he gave the sermon, that he and 2 of his colleagues went to Turkey with this express purpose of going to these 7 locations, okay? So they started in Ephesus, which is nearest the coast, and that's kind of where and they were driving their own car. There were just 3 of them in a car. And by the time they got to the second, and through the second location, which may have been Laodicea, I'm not sure, they realized that there was nothing other than Ephesus and maybe a little bit in Laodicea. There wasn't anything left of any of these places. So it was really kind of a waste to go stand in some village like Smyrna at that time, which basically is a rundown little place with some sheep and goats and nothing really to look at. So they spent the last of their 10 days there in a motel, in a hot tub, I think he said, reading about it rather than looking at it. And that's the problem with historical places. They're not now as they once were described, unfortunately. But we'll take a look at, what I like to do is take a look at just briefly at the 7 letters, and one in particular, and that's the one to Ephesus, and then note some things about them if we can. And we'll start with Ephesus. That was the central point. That was the big commercial center. It was near the ocean. You've got, I'm pretty correct, right? Near the ocean, maybe 6 or 8 miles inland. Today, that harbor, which was a thriving harbor at one time, is now silted in, so there's no access. I think there's still a river that runs through there. They call it a river. It's probably more like a creek. And so it resembles, the current city resembles really nothing of what it did 2,000 years ago. If you were traveling from Rome by ship, you didn't, or even Athens, you didn't, like they do today, kind of head out into the Mediterranean and make a direct run across the ocean 2 or 3 or 4 days out away from the shore. Usually they hug the coast. The ships at that time were somewhat difficult to handle and really difficult to handle in bad weather, as if you read Paul's last journey on a ship didn't turn out too well. And what you did is you coast hopped. And if you read some of Paul's journey, that's what he did, going some places. He went here and then he went there. Never really a direct route. If you got out a day or so sail from the coast and bad weather came, you could be in real trouble. And I forget, it's in the Black Sea. They've done a lot. They've done with radar. They've been able to scan the bottoms of the Black Sea, and I think they've discovered something like 2,000 or 3,000 shipwrecks from that time period, from 2,000 years ago. So I can't imagine what the route from Athens down to Jerusalem along that coast would look like. There'd be little ships, everything. And I think maybe National Geographic sponsored the last one I saw or read about maybe 10 or 15 years ago, or maybe a little more. And they found a ship. One of the things about the Black Sea, below a certain depth, and it's not very far down in the Black Sea, there's really no oxygen in the water. Okay, so really, which means there's no fish at those levels, but way down deep, there's no oxygen, which means that wood or something like that doesn't deteriorate much. Okay, and so they found a ship that was pretty well just intact with all its cargo, and they've been probably still are in the process of trying to excavate it and bring it up. Some of the things they've found, they've determined to leave in place. Come on in, we won't bother you. Oh, there we go. It only cost a nickel, that's okay. Anyway, so Ephesus was this one of these was a major stop in that sort of link from Rome to Athens, down the coast to Jerusalem, and then on to Egypt. And then once you're in Egypt, you could go from Egypt to Sicily to the Italian coast. So it was kind of a circular thing in that area. And I think, I'm not a sailor and don't know anything about the winds, but I assume it had something to do with wind patterns too, right, Bruce? How you got to go, because those ships didn't sail very well into the wind. They didn't understand how to what is it that you use when you sail into that one, jib or whatever the sail is that lets you do that. Anyway, so Ephesus is in a sense, it's the I suppose the third city of the Roman Empire, although Athens had not really fallen into disrepair. Athens was still, under the Romans, a place. If I were a wealthy Roman and I had sons who I thought had some potential, I would send them to some place in Greece, probably Athens, to be educated. Okay, the upper echelon or upper class in Rome, when they wrote letters back and forth, usually didn't write in Latin; they wrote in Greek. And probably the paradigm of that, or the exemplar of that, would be the Roman politician Cicero. He was fluent in Greek, in Latin, and probably a couple of other languages. But normally, when he wrote letters, he wrote them in Greek, because it was a sign of being an erudite person, you know. And so, oh, hi, Frank. Good Good morning, sir. You did show up. Gosh. Come on in, sit down. Okay, now, we're going to stop for a second. We'll wait till he comes back. And they got to introduce themselves. Because these people are actually too lazy to get up and shake your hand and tell you who they are, so we'll make you guys do it, okay? I'm not, huh? That's okay, because the more you distract, the less I have to expose myself as not knowing a darn thing. Come on in and sit down. Okay, you introduce yourself, and where are you from?
My name's George Thomas. I'm 70 down in Oak Grove, Missouri, and I'm a convert to the church and first heard the gospel from the Indians. And still excited about going out and sharing and try to share the whole world what's possible. So.
And I'll tell you, if you don't have much time today, stay away from him, okay? Hey, she's okay with that, I'll tell you that right now. Okay. Janice is okay with that. Go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
My name's Dale Brooker. I'm from St. Havens. I'm a priest. Been in the church all my life, ran away from it for a while, and then came back and was called to the office of a priest. So.
And I note a little twang in your voice. Is that Oklahoma I hear, or?
Oh, mercy.
Huh?
Got Wichita and Oklahoma.
Okay, there you go. I've spent a long time in Tulsa, so I got that. And if you're in North Tulsa, you don't kind of hear that, but if you're in South Tulsa, you really hear it. Okay. You get to introduce yourself next.
I'm Mary Ann Gross. I grew up in Miami, Florida, and finished my nursing degree at Grayson College. I did 25 years as an Army Reserve nurse, and I've been in the church all my life, several generations, and I love the gospel.
Good.
You look familiar, but 75.
And last but not least, here he comes. He's going to tell us who he is. Get to introduce yourself.
Pardon?
You get to introduce yourself.
I thought she'd already done. I'm Val Gross. We live down in Independence, Missouri. Just been up to the retreat here at campus. First time to be here. This is a nice building.
It is, isn't it?
Wow. Very
Somehow we lucked out. I don't know, but maybe it was God's providence that we showed up here. Suppose. Okay. Well, we welcome you all. Thanks for coming. Everybody who said they were going to come this morning did come. That's amazing. Now, in the reverse, if I'd said it, who knows? Anyway, this morning, what I previously said earlier was some of the things I talked about yesterday, and I heard from Mark and others kind of prompted me to rethink what I'd talked about, which was sort of the transition of the church from early times to now and some of the problems. It came into my mind that the one, as I said, I've always avoided Revelation, the book of Revelation, because it's really hard. It takes some knowledge to understand it, let's put it that way. So I thought maybe I'd wait till I was really old and kind of understood the scriptures, and then I'd look at Revelation. But we're going to do it this morning, and I'll show you, I guess, what a fool I am and what I don't know. But with your knowledge, you're going to make it worthwhile. Okay? And we were talking about the 7 churches that were in Ephesus, and looking at initially at Ephesus. And I want to look at that letter and then talk about some things that are in all of the letters consistently, and then maybe make some comments at the end if we have time. And you're welcome to override me or say whatever you want. But got to thinking, why these 7 locations? And the Paul, it appears that he's either started the churches there through his ministry, or was people that were with him had done that, and it's not clear if he was in all the 7 cities or not. But the reason that would have happened is at the time that this occurred 2,000 years ago, all of those 7 cities were sort of like, in this area, Omaha, Lincoln, Sioux City. They were kind of major hubs of places, and they all had roads that intersected, and ultimately the roads all that came from the inner part of Asia, the province of Asia, ended up at Ephesus, right? Yes, sir.
The seven churches formed a half circle around Ephesus. But Ephesus was the center of Diana worship. And that was where
Do we need a mic? Okay, we're gonna make you talk into a mic here because some of the people that watch us on the podcast are complaining, actually.
Ephesus was the, is it a button? Ephesus was where the world, well, the Temple of Diana was in Ephesus, and that was one of the ancient wonders of the world. And Ephesus was eventually, Jesus had a lot of things to say about Ephesus, except he said, you have left your first love.
Mhm.
And they were overpowered by the strength of Diana in that area.
Yeah. Okay, anyway, so it's the major center, and it's probably, if one were to go there, that's probably where you'd want to go, because they've revived a lot of the old buildings and marble. The streets were apparently, most of them lined with marble, which would be unusual. The place would have, in the sunlight, shone like a lamp. But, okay, so we're in Ephesus, and there are 6 other cities that he writes these letters to. And I think, in thinking about it, and somebody can help me who knows a little bit more about it, but I think it's kind of interesting that these letters are sort of the preface to the rest of the book of Revelation, which is a vision of really the future, right, that's given to John. And I guess it's, in part, these letters are certainly a warning and remonstration to the churches that they're not all of them are totally off the rails. Laodicea seems to be totally off the rails from this letter, but not them all. And it's interesting, they're not really, they're a condemnation in part in a I think a positive way. It's somebody who described these letters as an attempt to put iodine on a cut. It stings, it hurts when it's applied, but they're really meant to heal. And we'll see I'm going to talk a little bit about, and I hadn't thought about it until I looked at each one. There's a promise in each one of those, at the end of each one of those letters, and we'll talk here in a bit about the promises, okay? But if somebody would read, Bruce, do you want to do that? Go to chapter 2 and just read. It's not that long. It's only 7. Yeah, it's only 7 verses. Go ahead and read that. Read the letter to Ephesus.
Unto the servant of the church of Ephesus write, These things saith he that holdeth the 7 stars in his right hand, who walketh in the midst of the 7 golden candlesticks. I know thy works and thy labor, and thy patience, and how thou canst not bear them which are evil, and thou hast tried them which say they are apostles and are not, and hast found them liars. And hast borne and hast patience, and for my name's sake hast labored and hast not fainted. Nevertheless, I have somewhat against thee, because thou hast left thy first love. Remember therefore from whence thou art fallen, and repent, and do the first works. Or else I will come unto thee quickly, and will remove thy candlestick out of his place, except thou repent. But this thou hast, that thou hatest the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God.
Okay, just kind of an overview. Each of the letters is a direction from Christ to the seer, which is John, right? To write something. They're all addressed to an angel. They all have both complementary things, well, maybe a couple don't, but complementary and critical things to say. They call for vigilance, and and they tell them and it also tells each of the churches what's going to happen if they don't straighten up, right? And fly right. But there's also a promise. And there's also an implication. Now, if you've got ears to hear, you better hear, okay? So those are the things. And this one, we'll just start real quickly. And my purpose is not, I guess, some of this stuff is, I mean, there's commentaries, shelves and shelves of commentaries with learned people looking at these things and guessing. And, there's one series of commentators who believe that all these 7 letters are not to individual churches. They're just meant to be letters to the church over time. So they're like phases. Here's what's happening now. 100 years from now, here's a letter, and that's kind of been debunked. They're actually letters to a church, meaning something at that particular time. And the miraculous thing about the scriptures is, although written, some of them 4,000 years ago or more, some of them 2,000 years ago, and some of them by revelation more recently, they apply over time. And that's the question. As an aside, I have a friend my friend Mike, he's as far from where he should be as he can, not in very good health. He's, in my age, mid-70s. And I finally, in kind of coaching and cajoling him, he's reading a scripture every day. Got some kind of service, and he sends me the confirmation of what he read. And I keep telling him, that's like, if that's all you do, because I keep sending him an email or message back, and I keep asking him, now you've read John 3:16, okay? Did you go back and read the whole chapter? Because unless you do, you don't know what. You know what it says, okay, but you don't know why it was said in the context it was said. And that's the first thing any scripture you have to say, who said it? Who did they say it to? What did it mean to them at that time? And can it be applied to me or us at this time? And invariably the answer is, yeah, it sure can be applied to you now, because human nature hasn't changed, right? The folk we talked about Mark talked about the Enlightenment yesterday, and the Enlightenment came out of the Renaissance, and you can blame the Medicis in Florence about it, because they helped rediscover the philosophers of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. And so the Enlightenment really is, we as individuals can sit down, if we're bright enough, and reason all this stuff out. And what it did was, by having this sort of enlightenment, it created men of letters who wrote things, who moved the cultures more and more away from the church. Okay, I'm sorry, Mom.
I'm just going to add to what you were saying. When you're reading the Bible, or somebody says,
Yeah,
read
Mylon.
John 3:16, or anybody else, you can go to John 14:6. All of those. But,
Mm-hmm.
the point is, you need to read the whole scriptures, because you said that things don't change. We do, but God doesn't.
Yep.
We have to understand that. What we're sinning for today is no better. God doesn't like it any better than he did back when he wrote his word.
Nope.
And we seem to stumble over that a lot.
I would correct your statement. We can change.
Well, I didn't say we couldn't.
No, you said we change. Some people don't change, and that's the problem.
We will change if we read his word.
Yeah, that's right. That's what,
You will
and I agree
change.
with you. I absolutely agree with you. And that's the point of it, is hopefully changing to become more Christ-like. Frank?
It has more to do than, to me, it has more to do than just reading and understanding that we could change. The question is, what is happening here because of the class you're having here? Is there some way we can really apply it, that we can become more the type of people we're called to be?
And that's the big chasm, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's in front of us all, is we can learn all this stuff. And I think, I don't know about the Bible, I assume there would have been, but I know in history there have been men who could sit down and recite verbatim without notes the Quran. Okay? Now that's a major task, without error, okay? So they knew it by heart. They knew it. They had probably been coached since kids. They knew the entire Quran, which is, not that thick, but pretty thick. So they knew it. The question is, what are you going to do with it? And that's the difference, somebody was talking yesterday, is the difference between knowledge and wisdom, right?
Then you still get to know him. We will change because of him. And we can read, if we don't read this and make an effort to understand this, how's his spirit going to work?
Talk in that mic, Mylon, because they're, please, I know you don't.
I'm loud enough.
No, you're not. They can't hear you at home, and that's what we're trying, that's why we're trying to do it, okay? Yeah, I agree. Okay. Anyway, let's get back to this real quickly. And my purpose, I think, is just to look at some of these words and talk a little bit about what we think they might be, and then maybe prompt us all to go back and look at them and do some further study and try to understand them. Okay, so of course, who is the person who holds the 7 stars? That's got to be these 7 cities, right? And who is the person that holds all these things in his hand? Jesus Christ. Okay. It's interesting that he tells him in the second verse, "I know thy works and thy labor and thy patience." That's firsthand knowledge, isn't it? He's watching them. It's not drop in every year for an inspection to see what's going on and maybe make a guess as to what they have been doing or should do. It's a constant, daily, hour by hour, second by second observation of what they're doing. And how would you apply that today? Has that changed? Has it changed with any of us? It hasn't, has it? That's the sort of a mind-rattling part of it, isn't it? The God of creation, who has created everything, knows everything. He knows every breath you took and will take. He knows every head on your hair. Some of us have less than we used to. Is there a prayer for hair restoration? I don't know. Catholics probably got one. There's probably a saint for that. I'm not kidding. There probably is. Sorry, Catholics. But that's the point, that this God is. There's a book, and I forgot. Dick. I forget who the fellow was. Eric Prine, I think, wrote it. British guy. And the title of the book is "Your God is Too Small." Okay, your concept of God is too small. And I think Billy Graham's concept was probably, he would admit, it's probably doesn't encompass what it should. Okay, and he's as erudite about the Bible and some other people as he could. Some positive things are said here. They can't bear evil, and obviously there have been some wolves that have slipped into the sheepfold, and they've called them out, right? And we'll see in other, if you read this, there's other cities where they're talking about I think the Church of Satan, which is, do you know what that's a reference to? I think is a reference to one of the local synagogues where the Jews were coming into their midst and fomenting problems. And as I mentioned yesterday, I think it's probably accurate. As soon as Peter and John were thrown into prison after they had healed that lame man at the temple, I think that's when the hierarchy, because they were basically taken, arrested, I suppose they were arrested, taken before the powers that be, quizzed, told shut up. And were they beaten up a little bit? I think they were. And then shoved out the door because the hierarchy was afraid to arrest them and do anything to them at that point because they were afraid of all these people that had been converted. That's politics at its best, isn't it? Do something based on something you think something, I won't go there. But that's where was, do we know how old Paul would have been about this time, Saul was? Would he have been in his 20s maybe? If he lived into, they think 80, 60, 65, someplace in there, and was killed, and he was in his 50s or 60s, he probably was maybe 30-ish, I don't know, when this happened. So he was in Jerusalem, somewhere around there, because that's where his teacher was. So there's no mention of him being there. He's mentioned shortly after the episode at the temple where Peter and John are dealt with as dealing with, was it chapter 5, or 6, where Stephen is stoned. He's there. That's the first mention of Saul. So I wonder if this isn't the point where all this persecution or the concept of we got to deal with these guys and we got to deal with them ruthlessly if they challenge us and don't toe the mark. Yeah.
Yeah, something that I've kind of picked up on, and I may be off the track, I may be on the mark, but where the church is told that they left their first love, but they've been involved in rooting out the liars and so on. I'm wondering if they've gotten so focused on that process of keeping that out that they've forgotten the part of loving Christ and providing that love
To
others and caring
Yeah.
for them, and have kind of shifted into a more judgmental kind of frame of mind.
It could be a number of things. I think for me, what you have to ask is, I'm not sure we know exactly what the reference is, what his first love is. We can kind of guess, okay, that it's something. The main things are the plain things, right? And so it's something vital. Whether there are folks who think it was they lost their zeal for evangelism, okay, and that's what Christ sent everybody out to do when just before he ascended, go out and tell everybody about the gospel across the entire world. Were some of them only paying lip service to Christ, but had wandered off into other areas in their life that shouldn't, like a night, Friday night visit to the Temple of Diana, where you could get whatever you wanted. I don't know. Yes, sir.
Doesn't that sound sort of like us today?
Oh, sure. That's the point, isn't it?
I think the same commission's still there, and yet
Yeah.
I always wonder if, as the ask here, how many has witnessed to a stranger this past week? Or, I won't be that pinpoint, I'll give you a whole month. Have you talked to a single stranger and tried to witness to them about Jesus Christ this past month? That's where I see our real problems
Yeah.
are. Somehow we taught one another how to
And
keep our mouth
well,
shut.
we'll talk here a little bit about that. But when he says that they lost their first love, what's a primary question that should come into yours and my minds? What's my first love? What is my first love? Well, the Huskers got taken care of yesterday, so we'll talk about that. Mylon, right?
They didn't look bad.
Yeah.
They were still red and black, right?
I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't go off. But that's the issue, isn't it? What is your first love? What is your first love? Well, I have my wife, and now after 48 years, I almost blew it. I almost sent her birthday or anniversary card last year saying happy 49th. That would have been a mistake. It's only 48. I love my kids. My grandkids I really love. In fact, my kids could send them over and we'd just keep them and pay attention to them, not the kids. So. But do I love you guys? You're my brothers and sisters. Do I love the church? Which is you, all of you. And probably more importantly, as he said, do I love those around me enough to witness as I'm supposed to? I've got two brothers. Both have been baptized in the church. My brother Bob, I'm not sure he's been in a church since, well, I shouldn't say. It's been a long time. And if I say, when I go down to Kansas City to see Jay or something, I say, you want to go with me? And my brother Jim is not a churchgoer, but when I talk to him and we have discussions, I know he's reading the scriptures. I can tell because he responds in a way that you know. Okay. Yes, Jerry, go ahead. Give him the mic. Come on. Come on, Chester, get over there.
Yeah,
No, that's Gabby Hayes.
yeah, I've always thought that your first love is before you were born, when you was with Christ. And so after you was born, you have lost that first love. That's the way I've always looked at it.
We certainly travel a long ways from it somehow, right? Now, Brian has finally got me convinced that we are born without sin, okay? I've read the scriptures and so my next question when we get in this discussion is, then what happened? what happened to that young child? Because somebody mentioned yesterday that, and that's in the notes that Mark gave out, where it says, and I gotta go read that the baptism of a child is an abomination to God, okay? And so I gotta go read that and fill my own head with it, because, you see about how we're sinful, down deep inside. So what's that process that gets us from an infant born without sin, not needing baptized, to a, I don't know, 10, 12, 15, 18, 75-year-old who needs a lot more than help, needs a rescue squad and CPR. Yes, I'm sorry, Bruce, go ahead.
Well, Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. And there's a lot of people that keep the commandments, especially the Jewish priesthood. They were keeping the commandments as a matter of pride. But Paul said, love your neighbor as yourself. And he spoke about people who love their neighbors even more than they loved themselves. Throughout the 7 churches, there's only 2 churches that didn't have anything bad to say about them. The church of Smyrna was the church that endured the worst persecution, the most deaths from persecution. The church and the other church that the Lord loved and didn't have anything to say about was the church of Philadelphia. And that was a church that sent out schools and missionaries and hospitals, and was a great benefit to the world around them. I forgot what I was going to say.
You'll remember it. Hang on. Gotcha. Now, just as a reminder, Bruce, and I think you know this, when Christ was in the upper room talking to his disciples and essentially kind of equipping them with information they would need for after his crucifixion and resurrection, what did he tell them in terms of what the first commandment was? He said, I give you a new commandment, right? What was it? Love one another as I have loved you.
Love me with all your heart, might, mind, and strength.
Right, but what he said was, love each other, essentially, as I have loved you. Anybody ready to die for me? No takers on that one, huh? I wouldn't raise my hand either. But that's the point, isn't it? There's that chasm, isn't it? That big, that's the Grand Canyon of human problems right there, is how do I get from this side of it where I am now to the other side of that canyon where Christ wants me to be? It's right here. Yeah. Oh, Janice, you got a dog story you're going to tell us, or what?
One thing that's worried me lately,
Janice, I know you don't want to play Johnny Carson, but you got to put that mic up.
I
Right.
thought it was a weapon.
No, it is. It can be for some people.
One thing that's worried about me, I used to go to this store and people would connect with me. I meet people that needed help, and Bruce would be out in the car and say, where were you? What were you doing? Well, somebody needed help. I'm not connecting with people. I don't see people that need help anymore. I wonder, am I changing, that people are not reaching out to me, or I'm not reaching out to them? I used to go to the store and there was always somebody that needed help, and I'm not seeing that, and I'm not doing that. And I don't know why. It seems like if I just come into myself and I'm not seeing people, that I'm not helping them.
Can I suggest something to you? And I think I have to think more deeply what you just said. But one of the things I've noticed, one of the problems I have is I'm a sucker for anybody who needs a dollar bill. Okay, I mean, my wife she's got to be real careful when I'm around people. And one of my struggles is what what is the limit, or are the limits of charity? If I am Jesus Christ, or I'm to be like Christ, what's the limit of charity? What did in chapter 2, when all the disciples of Christ were all together in one room and of one mind, what did they start doing? They start taking all of their property, selling it, and putting all that money in one pot. Now that's I'm thinking the worldly me says that's nuts, man. That's nuts. Okay. But what did Christ have that he gave? Everything. His life. He gave everything. Did he possess anything really? Not really. And the things he did possess were bargained and raffled off basically by the Roman soldiers.
Yeah, you know, when they could claim possession because he was God.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
possessed anything, that allows us to hold on to it.
Go ahead.
Several years ago, over in
I'm sorry, let me finish my thought, because what I'm saying is, one, there's no limit, but the nature of charity is this. There's a giver and there's a receiver, right? So it's two-sided. So some people are really good givers, but they're not very good takers or receivers, okay? And it takes both, okay? Even I have to be a good I don't take compliments very well because I don't know why. I just don't take compliments very well. I think, it's not me. Give that to somebody else. And in your situation, at your age, perhaps now it's time for you to be a receiver of those kinds of things. No, don't laugh, Janice. I think that's true. To be a receiver of those things, and a good receiver, okay? Okay? How many times have people gotten stuff from other people as a gift or something, and they, watch a kid at Christmas when they get a Christmas present they don't like. Wrap that thing back up and give it to somebody. But I'm serious, Janice. I think you need to think about it as you're of an age, right? We won't talk about it, but you're of an age where the circumference of what you do is being reduced, right? But that doesn't mean that people won't come into you, okay? And that's also an obligation of every one of us sitting here around you. We forget who you are. From Sunday to Sunday, Monday morning, Janice, what was her last name? So it's a call to all of us to work together, to act like Christ and to be like Christ. Does that make any sense to you? That's my thought, is that there are times when you give and you give and you give. My wife keeps reminding me, you're retired, Hardt, you don't have an income anymore, and if you want to go on Medicaid and get stuck in a rest home in Brainerd, Nebraska, keep going, okay? Because nobody will know you there, and you'll be all by yourself. So I think, at least think about it. I think that's the response. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, a number of years ago, I was walking on the outskirts of, in Nepal there, in the capital, and I was out walking around, and early in the morning, this lady comes up holding a baby, and she's going, feed the baby. So I gave her some money, and thank you, and she was gone. And about 5 minutes later, I had 25 women with babies walking around with me. And I says, oh boy, what do I do? And frankly, I didn't know what to do. And I just said, well, if I walk long enough, they'll all just go away. Well, they
bet
never
not.
did. And finally, I reached in my wallet and I gave everybody so many rupee, and they disappeared. And I did this wrong. I did it to get rid of them. And as soon as I had done that, I walked a couple of steps and I heard the Lord say, George, the Lord loves a cheerful giver.
Right. That's
And,
one side of the giving, isn't it? The charity.
It has to do with your heart.
Well,
So
think about this, and this is Mark talked about that, and I don't know if you were there in Nepal when Mark was there, but they were walking among some of the people who were lame, and you used to see it in Europe a lot. there were beggars all over the place, and particularly in front of Notre Dame in Paris. There's two, they don't let you go in the main door, this big main door. You have to go in either door on side. And invariably, there were 2 or 3 people standing there who were begging, okay? And having been there quite a few times over the years, over now 40 years, I realized after sometime in the 80s, those guys must have unionized, okay? Because what happens is, you would think if they somebody got a prime spot for that, they wouldn't give it up, right? You'd have to shoot them to get them out of there. But what we noticed the last couple times we've been in the church and come out is you go in, you see the faces and whatever, and an hour later when you come out, it's 5 different people. So they have to have a schedule where they must rotate through that. But my point would be, the issue I was thinking about when you were saying that is, when Mark was in Nepal, he said that he saw some people that needed healing, you know. And in his mind, he wondered, and I wondered that too, when John and Peter are walking through the temple, or Christ walked into the temple and saw the blind guy and healed him, or Peter healed and John healed the lame guy, those 2 people, the blind guy for Christ and this other the lame guy for John and Peter, they couldn't have been the only guys sitting there. You think about that. In those times, they could have not been the only people sitting there begging with all kinds of maladies. Who knows? They wouldn't let lepers in the town, but something just a second, I'll finish. So my question, Mark's question was, what prompted Peter to do what he did? You know, think about it. I'm walking into Notre Dame and I see a man who's obviously got a real bad physical disability. Why don't I just walk over to him and say, you know, I don't have a lot of money, but... And the only explanation I could have is that at that moment in time, the Holy Spirit basically took over Peter. And whether Peter was cognizant of it, I assume he was, but somehow the prompting of the Holy Spirit was so strong, and the certainty of what was going to happen because of what Peter did was so conclusive that he had to do it, okay? I'm sorry. Go ahead, finish what your thought was.
I was just going to say, when you talk about the Holy Spirit, it's like being told you're supposed to administer to somebody, and there was a baby who had already died several hours, and the Lord says, administer to that baby. And we went ahead and administered to the baby, and the baby came alive. And for some reason, he lived for like 4 years, and then he died of something different. And I've always wondered about myself, how come we administer to some people and they have been instantly healed, and other people we have ministered to and it seems like nothing happens? I have to say, is there something wrong with George? And so you really got to come to know the Lord in your personal way, I guess.
Yeah. If you were prompted to do that, there was nothing inadequate about you at that point. That's my feeling.
Yeah.
And there was something else, and you may not even know about it. It's like I was talking about yesterday, when Christ drops a pebble in the water and the ripples go out in time for forever. That's the same. You don't know. It may have been a confirmation to you of the power of administration. Okay? But you just don't know.
Witnessing and this type of thing.
Yeah. Bruce, did you have something, Bruce?
You mentioned having all things in common. This was at the time when people were coming into Jerusalem from all parts of the world. Prices were high, jobs were scarce, and all these Christians didn't have anything to eat. And the only solution was for them to give everything that they had to the bishop and him distribute. And whenever Paul went to Jerusalem, Paul and Barnabas, they always took money and food to help support the people. people that were there that didn't have any income and needed things. But throughout the Bible, the ideal is for people to live under their own vine and
Yep.
fig tree.
And what's the problem with a system where, if you want to call it socialism, but what's the main problem with it? The main problem is, like Margaret Thatcher said, socialism worked great until you run out of other people's money.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so people were taking out more than they were putting in, and people who shouldn't have taken out were taken out.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the problem with it.
After the revelation in which the church broke up, it was about women in the priesthood, and some of those congregations that broke off in the church believed everything in common, and they did give everything to the bishop, and they did live in common.
Yeah.
And there was somebody that told about a son who was told his father was a bishop. No, the father was told to give the money to the son. And he says, I wouldn't give 2 cents to my son because I know what a spendthrift he is. And people, there's people that are irresponsible
Yep.
in spending money. But what else I was going to say earlier was that there was one church, the Church of Laodicea, the last church, the only church in which Jesus didn't have anything good to say about it.
Yep.
He told the Church of Laodicea, I will spew thee out of my mouth. But on the other hand, the overcomers within that church, it's some of the greatest blessings for overcomers than any church.
Yeah. We just have a couple more minutes. I just wanted to finish a couple of things here and get some insight real quickly. He talks about the Nicolaitans. I don't know, Bruce. They were like the group that came out early on and said Christ isn't God; He's a created being. We talked about him yesterday. But does anybody know anything about what they were talking about or what they were trying to?
Nicolaitans comes from the word Nicholas. And Nicholas was a convert, and he started out as one of the early people that acted as servants, distributing food and things like that. And then finally he grew up and he brought his old beliefs that were not Christian into the church, and the followers of Nicholas were practicing some of the heathen beliefs.
Yeah.
And Nicholas was criticized in many places throughout the Old.
So just
the New
another
Testament.
effort to move people off the line is basically what it was.
Yeah.
Let me look here. One last thing. We're almost done. I'll just recap real quick. There's a promise in each one of the letters, no matter how criticizing, difficult it is for them. In the first one, in Ephesus, Christ promises those who prevail will eat at the tree of life. Does that remind you of anything? Lehi's vision, right? In Smyrna, they would receive a crown of life, and the one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. Here we get a little more sort of vague. Hidden manna, Pergamon, that he'll give them hidden manna, like manna was, and he will give them a new white stone with a new name written on it. That's one that kind of mystifies me. Now, the Greeks used to vote by using stones, and some were black and some were white. So maybe what he's saying is you're going to get a white stone and your name's on it, so you can't be misinterpreted as to that it's a positive thing for you. I don't know. The Thyatirans were going to be given authority over the nations and the morning star. Okay? Sardis was going. They were going to receive white garments, and their names would not be stricken from the book of life. Hopefully that would happen. In Philadelphia, they would become the pillars of the temple of God. And in Laodicea, even though how bad they were off, those who persevered to the end would sit with him on his throne like he sits on the throne with God. All marvelous promises. And I assume all of those promises are there available for us. Think about it. And further study, we'll have to figure out exactly what they're talking about. But interesting, a very interesting and complex book of the Bible. Part of it is the fact that it's sort of written in code. I think maybe John wrote it, part of it in a way that and he was apparently on Patmos, the island, and I'm assuming probably everything he sent out and came to him written-wise was reviewed by the Romans, because they were, if they didn't have a KGB, they had a better one, okay, of watching people, because the last thing they wanted was any kind of difficulty among the population. Because most of the populations they conquered, they let them do their own thing in a way. They kept their religions, except for a Roman overlord, they kind of kept their governments, those kinds of things. So an interesting and marvelous book. Anyway, thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.